Mozambique protests. There is a state of generalized chaos.
Now, for analysis on the unrest in Mozambique, we're joined by Intel Watch Executive Director Paula Christina Rock. Good evening, Paula. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Firstly, your reaction to all that has happened now post that announcement confirming Daniel Shapo as the winner post those elections.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and good evening. The situation right now is very volatile. It was expected. We knew that both sides were going to stick to their positions. That Frelimo, the ruling party for almost 50 years, was never about to leave power peacefully or gracefully, and that the opposition in this form now of Podemos and Venancio Mondlane was going to fight for electoral truth. Now, electoral truth is something that the European Union, local observers, the church, civil society have demanded. So we still don't know who won the elections. So when we understood that, okay, the Constitutional Court or Constitutional Council endorsed the electoral fraud and in fact gave the ruling party the result that they wanted, there would be a popular reaction. And what we have seen are days of rage. But they aren't days of rage that like the ones we saw in the last 2 months, because the elections, as you'll remember, were on the 9th of October. These are very different days of popular frustration, of civil disobedience. They're much more violent. And the opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane, has been calling for a calm. He's saying, do not attack, do not loot. We do not want our country vandalized. We do not want the targeting of infrastructure or the economy. So like you said in your introduction, I do believe that this is part of a more instrumentalized, state-led situation.
I want to delve deeper into that analysis or your position on that perhaps this is state-led. But before that, let's talk about Venancio Mondlane's call, because now he's denounced the violence. But you've got the youth that were mobilized, they've taken to the streets. But right now, when you have him calling for them to stand down or somehow not target the infrastructure of the country, they're not doing so. They're not heeding that call. They're going full steam ahead. What must happen now?
So Venancio Mondlane, in the last 2 months, let's see the pattern of protests. People have been on the streets singing the national anthem. They've been banging pots and pans. They have been peacefully protesting on the streets, and yes, creating barricades and closing access to the borders, etc. So with great economic cost to South Africa also, but especially to Mozambique. So yes, there have been serious disruptions. But never with a level of violence as we have seen. The violence has been incremental. Now, Venancio Mondlane, what I believe he wants, and he hasn't said this specifically, is a social revolution. He doesn't want a military coup. He wants a social revolution where people will go to the presidential palace and they will take the presidential palace. And for him, he sees this as something that is possible without tremendous bloodshed, because we have seen also that the military and the security apparatus are not fully endorsing either one or the other.
So when they storm, pardon me for interjecting there, so when they storm the presidential palace, what happens then? Because in most coups, that's what happens. Then there will be a takeover of government and a regime change. So this social revolution, how does it unfold? They get to the presidential palace, they take over, then most certainly there'd have to be a president or somebody who governs from that point onwards.
You're absolutely correct, yes. A coup is the military that takes over. In this case, it would be a social revolution by the people, and it would probably, in his calculations, bring the government to reconsider sitting down and talking. Now, Frelimo, we've seen, we're not exactly sure where the government is and what they are doing. Unfortunately, it seems that there is a state of generalized chaos. Now, the police, the head of the police is stating one thing, ministers are stating something else. The president, we haven't heard from him. The presidential candidate from the ruling party is calling for a dialogue. So there are very mixed messages. But yes, you're absolutely right. It would be a point of, if we have not taken power through the elections, through peaceful and constitutional means, we will take to the streets so that we can be heard. The day after, or the moment that they do reach the presidential palace, we don't know what he has planned for that. But the problem is, surrounding the presidential palace, and this is important, is a large contingent of Rwandan troops, also to protect against a military takeover. So we have very many elements that are now within the calculation of the ruling party.
All right. Now, we've heard from reporters that really here, when you have those that have taken to the streets, on the streets, it's not really about the electoral outcome. Theirs is not about who won or who didn't win, but it really is the social issues that have continued to plague the country, that it would have been anything. It essentially served as a catalyst for them to take to the streets, but there have been issues that have been bubbling under in that country. So what we're seeing here is probably a protest that might not lead to some sort of benefit for Venancio Mondlane in the long run.
Unfortunately, I don't agree. I think Mozambique has had elections and has had situations. They've had bread riots before, and nothing was of this dimension. What Venancio Mondlane did was galvanize the youth, yes, absolutely, but also galvanize supporters of Frelimo that were disappointed and supporters of other opposition parties. So he was bringing together, let's say, a third vision for Mozambique. So yes, socioeconomic issues would drive protests, but what it lies behind them are the structural issues of corruption, of bad governance, and everything that people voted Frelimo out for. And so yes, we would have discontentment, but also not to the level where we have Venancio Mondlane gives instructions and people follow them until 48 hours ago. And that's why I suspect something else is in play here. Also because we had yesterday 4 simultaneous prison breaks in Maputo and the provinces of Zambezia and Gaza. And we are still trying to calculate the number of inmates that escaped or were released in this case, and they could be 10,000. Now, what Venancio Mondlane is saying, and civil society as well, and we have seen videos of this, unfortunately, have been that many of those prisoners that escaped weren't wearing the orange suits of inmates. They were protesters that had been rounded up in the last 2 months. They were subsequently recaptured, and we've seen videos that are credible of 150 of those inmates that were executed.
You've said something here. You say that something else could possibly be at play. And you also then mentioned that, according to you, they didn't escape, they were actually released. Just unpack that for us there.
So I think one thing that will make a lot of sense to South Africans was the July 2021 crisis, where later, through different commissions and then through the press and investigations, we realized that there was an underhanded element of rogue security elements that were driving the looting, that were driving what they wanted to do essentially was a coup in South Africa against President Ramaphosa's government. So we understood then that there was, let's say, a third force. And this is not new to South Africa, and it's not conspiracy theory. In fact, it has been very well documented. So if we take that now to the Mozambican perspective, that's exactly what's happening. You release several prisoners. You give them weapons, you create militias, and you allow the police and the military not to be condemned in the most extreme ways, the way they had been, because they had been killing protesters in the last 2 months, but to justify the clampdown now in a way that we are capturing dangerous terrorists.
Okay, and also probably delegitimize the cause of the ordinary citizens now, because you continuously have the conversation around the looting, the damaging of infrastructure, even if maybe now they've decided to be disciplined in their protests. But if you've infiltrated these groupings of perhaps peaceful protesters with these hardened criminals, then you'll have many people that will no longer support these protesters and say that, no, you guys are criminals yourselves, you've just been destructive, there clearly is no greater cause, you're just destructive.
Absolutely, 100% correct. And it's also to delegitimize Venancio Mondlane, saying this is a man that wants a bloodshed. This is a man that is destroying infrastructure that taxpayers have been building and have been investing in. And this is not the way to lead the country. They don't want him to continue to have the following that he has.